Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. A lot of breaking news. So we're tracking the fallout after Dems caved and Schumer helped the Republicans pass their budget. New polling there, too, as well. And I'm interested to get Saagar's take on how all of this went down since Ryan and Emily talked about it some and myself talked about it some on Friday. We also have some pretty stunning new reporting from the Kamala campaign about Joe Biden's interventions there and his demands on her, and also how pathetically she just accepted them. So we'll get into all of that. Trump appeared over the weekend to openly defy a court order with regard to his invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. So we will break all of those details down for you. We've got some new economic numbers. The consumer sentiment index plunged significantly. We've got Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, out there saying stock market corrections are normal, don't worry about it. So obviously keeping our eye on that as well. Trump announced massive strikes against the Houthis, and they are claiming retaliation. Zionists are getting some wins in Trump administration staffing. This is one that Saagar has been tracking really closely. And I'm taking a look at the way that anti-Semitism is being weaponized in order to facilitate Trump's power grab.
Yep. Well, unfortunately, you could probably talk about that one for like 45 minutes or an entire show.
It was hard to narrow down the monologue.
What do you not put in the monologue? I'm looking forward to that. Thank you to everybody who's been subscribing to the show. We really appreciate it. We've got 5 days a week of coverage now here on Breaking Points. I hope everybody is enjoying that. But yeah, let's talk about the Democrats. There's a lot to break down here.
Yeah, so you guys know there was a whole thing last week. Democrats in the Senate, had to help Republicans to pass this budget. Otherwise, the government was going to shut down. This was really the only point of leverage that Democrats have with Republicans for the foreseeable future. And yet, in spite of that, and in spite of the fact that, Democrats and myself believe that there's this authoritarian power grab going on, they decided they would cave. Led by Chuck Schumer and actually Kirsten Gillibrand, kind of interesting. The two senators from New York, home of Wall Street, were the two that led the charge to cave. And of course, we'll have the economic numbers in a moment to show you why they may have been super concerned about a government shutdown. But in any case, in the wake of that, we have some new polling numbers about how people feel about Democrats and how they are doing in this new Trump era 2.0. And those numbers are pretty grim. Let's take a listen.
Americans' favorable views of the Democratic Party's brand are at a record low, just 29%. That's compared to 36% for Republicans. It is the lowest ever recorded for Democrats in CNN polling going back more than 30 years. As you can see, the party's numbers dropping a staggering 20 points in just 4 years. The CNN SRSR's poll also found 57% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning voters are more interested in seeing their party leaders stop the GOP agenda, compared to 42% who are more interested in cutting bipartisan deals. It is a big shift from where the party stood at the start of Trump's first term in 2017.
Yeah, and we have a graphic of that last piece just to put back up on the screen because I think this is a really important point. The way that the Democratic base has moved in terms of what they want to see out of the party. So back in April of 2017, this might actually surprise you because it's remembered as a time of sort of peak Trump resistance. But at that time, you still had a majority of Democrats, 59%, who said what they wanted to see Democrats in Congress do was to make compromise with Trump to gain consensus on legislation versus 33% saying they need to stick to their positions, even if it means not getting things done. Now that has completely reversed. 65% of Democrats want the party to stand up to Trump and stick to their positions, even if it means grinding the gears to a halt. And a lot of that movement with regard to, listen, Democrats are just not popular across the board. A lot of the movement in terms of their approval rating falling off, Saagar, comes from within their own party, where people are incredibly dissatisfied with the weakness and the failures of Democratic leaders like Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating to see their internal thinking inside of the party. And, we've probably talked about it here ad nauseum, but probably a lot of our viewers may not have been really watching a lot or involved in politics back in the 2010 period. This is exactly what the Republican base wanted to see from its leaders against Obama. And the thing is about Mitch McConnell, he may be an establishment type. He actually read the moment incredibly well in 2009. In that first interview,
he was very Machiavellian, yeah.
Yeah, they asked him, they said, okay, so what is your strategy to deal with Barack Obama? And he said, our goal is to get Barack Obama to not win re-election in 2012. Now, obviously they failed, but their theory was just this president, no matter what he puts in front of us, we are going to slow this thing down no matter what. We will use the full exercise of the United States Senate and our majority that we have to make sure that we hold things up. There's no more business as usual. In a lot of ways, like, kind of reinvented the Washington mold in that regard. So what the Democrats want to see is, at this point, too, if you are a Democrat and you're quote unquote playing by the rules, you are a bit of a fool, no? I mean, 2010 was a long time ago, right? It's been 15 years at this point for you to adapt. The only thing that I'm like somewhat sympathetic to is that these establishment Democrats are not wrong. That if they had shut down the government, Trump and Elon and them would have used it as a pretext to basically just pick who would be the essential government workers and who is not. Now, the counter to that, which is also correct, is, well, that's basically what they're doing.
They're already
now.
doing it, yeah.
So what's the point? From a pure statistical political calculus point of view, I think that just for their own outcome, they probably should have shut down the government, because first of all, the Democratic base would have been with them. Second, I mean, again, I'm not advocating for this. I don't think it'd be a good thing, but the economy would continue to be bad. Like, stock markets always crash whenever there's a shutdown. People downgrade our debt. There'd be a lot more questions about the debt ceiling and fights like that in the future. Overall, the stocks definitely would have fallen. It would have only fed more into an economic collapse narrative that would obviously, I think, be beneficial to the Democrats. Republicans did actually kind of want to shut down. Apparently, Trump and them were looking for a shutdown in some ways because they thought they would win that fight. I don't think that's ever the case. That anytime a party in power has all three branches of government, it's ridiculous to think that you're not going to get the overall blame from the American people. So I really have no idea kind of which way, but I get where the establishment Dems and all them were coming from, but it is a profound political misreading of the moment. But because they're trying to do business as usual, whereas it's clear the Trump administration is not really interested in that, and the Democrat base is also not really interested in that. So it's like an old gasp, I think, of something. Do I think it will happen again? No, I don't. Not after all of this.
You don't think so? Oh, I don't know. I mean, here's the thing: is like Chuck Schumer. First of all, I think he cannot update his mental model to adjust for what you just described. We are no longer in politics as usual. This is not some normal, like, back and forth, give and take. That's not what's going on. So I think because he is old and because he's been there for so long, he is incapable of really grappling with that. But we also have to say, the failure here on the Democratic leadership part started long before you got to Friday and are faced with this, like, yes or no vote. The failure really started when they had no plan for, like, okay, here is our demand, and we are sticking to it. And we are not giving you the votes that you need, Republican Party and Trump, in order to pass this budget resolution without you acceding to our demands. Now, there could have been any number of demands that you make. You know, it could have been, we want funding restored to the Department of Education. We want the CFPB back. We want Doge on a Social Security. We want Elon fired. We want Elon subpoenaed. We want Doge to be done or have to report to Congress. I mean, there are 30 different things off the top of your head that you could think of that would have been reasonable demands for Democrats to make, where they would have been firmly on the side of public opinion. They could have messaged relentlessly on it. And then if the government shuts down, they say, listen, we made really clear what we needed in here. We were willing to work with Republicans. They never came to us with, and here we made it really, really clear what we would need to vote for this bill. They didn't do it. That's why the government is shut down. So even the fact that you got to this vote and none of that groundwork had been laid, that's really where the ultimate failure lay. But I mean, listen, they don't have a lot of power in DC. There are only a few times where Republicans need them. This is one of the only times in sight where Republicans need them for anything. And you just passed this and you got nothing? Like, that is utterly pathetic. Pathetic. And so, and I think it's not just Democrats who want to see Democrats fight. There are a lot of independents out there. I mean, we could put the next piece up on the screen. There's a lot of Trump voters who aren't super happy with what's going on and would like to see some balance brought back to D.C. in terms of, checks and balances and the opposition party acting like something other than like pathetic losers. So in this particular focus group, which, it's not scientific, but always interesting to hear what voters have to say, 10 of 13 Trump voters, these are people who voted for Biden and then switched to Trump, said that they were unhappy with Trump's approach. Some words that were used were erratic, frightening, disruptive, and dictator. That being said, what was it like? One of them said that they would have switched their votes to Kamala.
Yeah.
So even as they're very dissatisfied with Trump, yeah, there we go. Only one of the 10 Trump voters turned critics said that they would choose Kamala Harris for president if they could do it over again. And I mean, this is the risk for Democrats is like, yeah, people are increasingly souring on the Trump and Elon show in D.C., but are they going to offer a sufficient enough response and appealing enough alternative that people will say, okay, but this is better than what's offered on the other side?
That's a very good point, right? Is that you can be dissatisfied with your pick, but you can also say, yeah, it was still the better pick, or it was somebody who I would stick with. That was actually probably the biggest Democratic problem in a nutshell. We should also say, did not realize, not only with the approval figure, but flagged this morning was that in that NBC News poll about approval rating, about 36% approval, you'll see approved of the Republican Party, but of those, they consider themselves part of the MAGA movement, which is apparently one of the highest numbers ever recorded. I think that's important from a party takeover perspective. There's this old school idea that was tested in 2017 and in 2024 during the primary that it's like MAGA is not really, MAGA itself is a distinct part. And it's like, no, this is a complete and total takeover of the Republican Party. So I think that is important for people to understand too, in terms of where their approval for Trump will be and in terms of also how they consider themselves politically distinct from any previous iteration of the Republican Party. You did have flagged this part of Chuck Schumer. He's apparently on book tour right now. What timing? And the book is on anti-Semitism. How good is that, right? It's like check, check, check in terms of all the boxes. Here he is explaining why he decided to do what he did. Let's take a listen.
I knew this would be an unpopular decision. I knew that. I know politics. But I felt so strongly as a leader that I couldn't let this happen because weeks and months from now, things would be far worse than they even are today, that I had to do what I had to do.
Can I just ask you about the tactic here? Because the choice that you made to vote with the Republicans, isn't that an argument to get rid of the filibuster? You wanted to keep it when you were in the majority, but if you're not going to use it in the minority, then what's the point of it?
The point here, again, I'll repeat what I said, would be how devastating a shutdown would be. Just think a month from now, if half the federal workers...
But I'm asking about the use of the filibuster.
No, but the bottom line is, if we would have, if the filibuster would have been used and the government shut down, the devastation would be terrible. The choice has been made, but I think the whole Democratic Party is united on what I mentioned in the earlier broadcast. Showing how bad Trump is in every way, we're organizing this week and next week in Republican districts. We're having rallies to not give tax breaks to millionaires, and we're succeeding. We're succeeding, Lulu. We're bringing his numbers down.
Yeah, it's just, it was a great question. His answer is incredibly revealing. I do think everyone should really go back to the point that you were making, is that it was obvious, this entire thing was obvious now for weeks to anybody who can read the news in Washington. That means including these Senate leaders. And it's like, well, so you really had no idea between you and Hakeem Jeffries, what any sort of plan was. It is interesting, the House Democrats were trying to cast a lot of blame on Schumer, but a lot of it's on them too, because it's like you were saying, if you knew this was coming down the pipeline, you needed to have some sort of strategy, both for an alternative to be able to force Republicans. And actually, the Republicans played their hands well at the end. What they did is they passed it, and then they all just left town, meaning that basically the Democrats would have had to call their bluff. If they had basically telegraphed from the future there could have been a fight, then maybe the Republican leaders would not have felt so confident. And now you've got all the way through September. I mean, that's a long time in politics. That's 9 months of the first Trump administration where he does not have to contend with a serious legislative crisis. And actually, the real failure on Schumer's part is the tax bill, because now what they can do is use that tax bill and reconciliation there in the future to basically pass it before that September deadline, meaning that this is now the ground that you have to fight on where you've already given up any significant leverage that you once have. So it's actually maybe frankly worse than people may think, because if you hadn't just done, let's say, a 30-day extension of spending, you could continue to use that as leverage over a future tax negotiation. Now you have nothing. And the Republicans have united control of government. They can use a reconciliation package, and they don't even need to look at you anymore.
Right. Well, and it's not just the leverage. Jeff Stein actually did the best reporting on this. In the CR, this actually hands Trump, and it's not really accurate to call it a CR because the continuing resolution is usually just the previous budget levels. This was not just the previous budget levels. This cut domestic spending, it raised defense spending, it had different provisions in it. The Republicans wanted, like, not having to vote on Trump's tariff agenda. But also inherent in this legislation is handing more power to the executive. And so it's not just leverage. It's also a matter of fact and reality that, the one place, and we'll talk about this more later in the show, the one place where there has been some effective effort to, block and stymie the Trump and Elon, take down the government approach has been in the court system. And you are cutting out some of the legal arguments you can make against them in court by signing on to this budget resolution. So that was the other part of this that was really incredibly important. But what is so different here from the Trump 1.0 and the Democratic Party approach really is the way that liberals are so disgusted with leadership. And, to Saagar's point about the House Democrats being pissed off at Schumer, we're not just talking about AOC here. Yes, AOC was pissed off, but there were moderate Democrats who reportedly were ready to write AOC checks to primary Chuck Schumer. Why? Because they felt like they got hung out to dry. They felt like if you're in a swing district and you're facing a tough reelect, they felt like they took a tough vote to vote against this. I'm not really sure it was that tough of a vote, ultimately, if it's going to be like that politically perilous for them. But that's the way they felt about it. And then they felt they were made to, quote, walk the plank by Chuck Schumer. So they were furious at how they were sort of hung out to dry here. And so there's rebellion within the Democratic caucus. I mean, it was astonishing. Hakeem Jeffries got asked the question, like, hey, do you think that Chuck Schumer should continue here in leadership? And he said, no comment. Very pointedly, no comment, asked about it multiple times, would not say that he has confidence in Chuck Schumer, but that Chuck Schumer should continue to lead. I mean, that in and of itself is quite extraordinary. Another extraordinary thing that happened is that Nancy Pelosi came out against Chuck Schumer and was like, no, Democrats should vote against this and they should shut it down. They should listen to the women. Now, she didn't name him specifically, but obviously we all know this was, quite a confrontational approach for her to take as well, putting that out. And so you've got a couple of organizations. You've got Pass the Torch. These are the people who sort of mobilized to try to push Biden out of the race after that disastrous debate performance. You can put this up on the screen. They're calling for Schumer to resign. That's significant. So you've got them using their resources, their lists, whatever, to push this messaging. And then you also have Indivisible, which is kind of the preeminent liberal resistance group, which ended up being adversarial to some of the Bernie type primary candidates, over the years, et cetera. So these are liberals, right? Rock solid, Democratic liberals who are also calling on Schumer to step aside. And then the Midas Touch folks have been quite aggressively critical of Schumer and are telling Democrats to, quote, grow a spine. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what they had to say.
Democrats need to use their leverage to stop what Trump and Musk and Doge are doing. Use every leverage point. Americans want fighters, not this crap, not caving. Grow a spine, vote against cloture, vote against the CR. The American people are with you. And how do we know that? Because across the country, people in red areas, blue areas, purple areas are rising up at this hostile government takeover. We know what is happening. We know Musk is gutting Medicaid. We know Musk says that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and he's firing most of the people who work at the Social Security Administration. People see the government buildings shutting down. We see the Trump regime firing veterans, getting rid of the workers, 70,000 workers at the VA, getting rid of critical government infrastructure, sinking our economy. We must take a stand. We must use the leverage that we, the people, have to stop the hostile government takeover. Reconsider immediately. Stop being spineless. Fight for the people.
Stop being spineless. And Midas Touch is really sort of like the beating heart of the Democratic Party base at this point. They've had an astronomical growth in terms of their ratings. By some metrics, they are the #1 podcast in the world. And, much at the expense of the MSNBCs and the CNNs and even the Washington Post and New York Times. So when they're coming out so aggressively against Democratic leadership, that is a significant indicator.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody sent me something showing about their podcast statistics. And I think the answer is just okay, if it's not #1, how about this? It's just a big channel. It's 4.5 million subscribers on YouTube. These guys are racking up literally millions and millions of views on top of people like Brian Tyler Cohen and other who we interviewed previously. People should go and watch that just to get a sense of kind of who these new thought leaders are in the Democratic Party, and or really just who people are abandoning liberal media for. It's not always, conservative influencers, right? So I do think that generally it's important for people to take this in and to see politically where the mood is going to go. But, the part of the issue is with timing and with leverage. It's well, what can you now really do in the future? You kick the can down the road to September. You can try and block the tax bill. It's not going to work because of the way that reconciliation and all of that is. And 9 months is just an eternity, or 6 months or whatever is an eternity in politics to see who knows how much things could change in the meantime. Now is definitely the time. They missed it. They're not going to have some grand showdown moment now for quite some time. I wouldn't put it past the Republicans to try and, attach a CR or something like that to a tax bill and kick this even further. They could even hitch the debt ceiling or something like that to reconcile it, to take away even more leverage points. By that time, you're in the midterms. And if this is all you have till the midterms, good luck to you.
Yeah. Well, and I think the people like Midas Touch and many others who were saying grow a spine and, vote against this and shut it down, I think were also immediately vindicated because what happened literally that night, you can put this up on the screen, Trump moved forward with gutting 7 more agencies and issuing an executive order saying that, they should be effectively ended to the greatest extent possible. And like I was saying, part of the argument against voting for this was that it handed more power to the Trump administration to take unilateral action. It strips away some of the legal arguments that, Democratic allies can make in court against these sorts of things. And so the fact that they vote for this and then immediately Trump issues this executive order that's 7 more agencies are toast. These were all, relatively small agencies, but still obviously quite significant. I think that really immediately vindicated those who thought that the Democrats took the wrong strategy here and really should have stood up and fought. The last thing I'll say is this is something we've touched on before. The upset at Democratic leadership, first of all, it's across the board ideologically. It's being painted sometimes in the media as leftists or progressives or, the left is upset at Democratic leadership. That's just not an accurate way to characterize it at this point, because even within the Democratic House caucus, you have moderates who are very unhappy with the lack of leadership here. I wish it had more of an ideological valence to it, that there was more sort of progressive ideology behind the revolt, but it's not. It's literally tactical. It's we want you to fight. We feel like our country is being taken away from us in real time. We feel like they are not operating by the rules, and you all are pretending like you're back in 1982 and making deals and cutting deals across the aisle. That is just not going to work in this era, not to mention how out of touch they seem with all of their sort of media outreach efforts, et cetera. So that really is the core of the upset at Democratic leadership, is not so much ideological, it's tactical. It's we want you to grow a spine, we want you to fight, we want you to prove to us that you actually care about what's happening right now in the way that we do. So this will be an important story to continue to watch as the Democratic Party figures itself out.
I
in this
still
era.
want to see some primaries, though. I want to, because I haven't seen any announcements, in the same way. By this time around, well, it's not really fair, but I guess if we're going to compare Doge and the liberal base's reaction to Obamacare, which was a little bit later in the administration during the first term, that's when those announcements for primaries started to spring up. But I was checking, and I haven't seen any real, somebody always primaries Nancy Pelosi. Plot twist, it never works out. somebody always primaries, I don't know, Manchin or somebody like that. He's gone. So we need to see actual like primary action for somebody who's up this time around. And then we need to see that level of like grassroots money that's inflowing. It is, I mean, what was the whole beef with AOC over oversight where she promised not to primary people, even if she still didn't get it? So the problem is like they're boxed into a corner a little bit. I'm curious to see if they're going to break away from that. If you really want to have some power in the next Congress, that's the only way that it's going to happen. The only reason the Tea Party ever got taken seriously is because they were able to take out literally the #2 Republican in the country. People should just remember how insane stuff like that can be.
Yeah, well, that was the idea behind the Justice Democrats, which of course Kyle was involved in the founding of, was that you would get some of these renegades in there who didn't owe their loyalty to the like traditional Democratic Party system, and they would be adversarial to leadership in the same way that the Tea Party was adversarial to Republican leadership. And the Tea Party and the Freedom Caucus and these successive like Tea Party-esque parts of the Republican Party, they have wielded disproportionate amount of power because they understood you only need a small number who are willing to band together and gum things up, and you can get a lot. You can actually extract a lot, but your threat has to be credible. And so, they were able to successfully primary, obviously AOC and Joe Crowley being the most prominent example, but Cori Bush is able to get in there, Jamal Bowman. These are all people, challenging incumbent Democrats and being able to be successful. But then that second piece of being adversarial towards leadership, that never came. And so they were never able to really, use their power as some sort of cohesive group. They more acted as just like, standard individual members with individual viewpoints, et cetera. The fact that you now have the base pushing in this direction, and you have, again, moderates, even within the Democratic caucus, who are saying primary Chuck Schumer, we've got your back, et cetera. It's a different landscape that could create more courage among elected leaders to be more adversarial towards leadership. And in fact, we've already seen that. I mean, even with AOC herself, she's been quite aggressively critical of Chuck Schumer in this moment in a way that we really haven't heard her, be critical of Nancy Pelosi or other Democratic leaders in the past. So we'll see. Like Saagar says, we've got to see how this all shakes out, and are there real primaries, and do they succeed, and how does this all come together? Yes. But I can tell you right now, the landscape is so different in the Democratic Party and among, who they're looking to also in terms of their media than it was previously.
Absolutely. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.